Hello and welcome to the Men at the Movies, the YouTube channel. My name's Paul McDonald, and joining me, pouring himself a tasty beverage, is Andreas Werner. Andreas and we talked about Top Gun Maverick for a couple hours, and yet there's more. So we're going to, because we feel like this scene, this clip from with Maverick and Iceman, Tom Cruise and Val Kilmer, is sort of central to the whole movie, sort of the cornerstone that holds it all together. So we're going to play that clip and then talk about why we feel that it's such an integral piece of the movie.
Admiral? That's my wingman. Please, don't worry about me. What can I do for you? All right. Well, Rooster's still angry with me about what I did. I thought eventually he would understand why. I hoped he'd forgive me. The mission is less than 3 weeks away. The kid's not ready. He doesn't want what I have to give. Ice, please. Don't ask me to send someone else to die. Please don't. Don't ask me to send him. Send me. I don't know how. I'm not a teacher, Ice. I'm a fighter pilot. A naval aviator. It's not what I am. It's who I am. How do I teach that? Even if I could teach it, it's not what Rooster wants. It's not what the Navy wants. That's why they canned me the last time. The only reason I'm here is you. If I send him on this mission, he might never come home. And if I don't send him, he'll never forgive me. Either way, I could lose him forever. I know. I know. The Navy needs Maverick. The kid needs Maverick. That's why I fought for you. That's why you're still here. Thank you, Ice, for everything.
So, Andreas, we on the Men at the Movies podcast, we talked a little bit about this conversation, but mostly because you wanted to talk about the moment Maverick really let go. But we held back. We kept some stuff in the tank, as it were. And there's a lot of depth into this, a lot of ways that we could go. But since I've done all the talking so far, what did you see? What is it that really stands out to you in that moment, in that crucial scene between Iceman and Maverick?
As men, we create an identity for ourselves, and then we put that identity in a box. And once the identity is there, we begin to build off of it. And fighter pilots, um, they get a call sign, right? They get an identity as a fighter pilot.
Mm-hmm.
And Maverick doesn't call himself Pete Mitchell. He calls himself
Right.
Maverick, right?
Yeah.
And we call him Maverick. And the movie is not called Top Gun Pete Mitchell. The movie's called Top Gun Maverick, right? The entire thing is organized around this identity that he's created, that he's fostered, that he's developed. And it is coming to a crossroads because at this point in the movie, um, the thing that Maverick was created for, which is to shoot down bad guys, right? Maverick is a naval aviator. He is a combatant. He is meant to go to war and come home. That identity, or the need for that identity, is being challenged, right? He doesn't know if it's still worth it. He doesn't know if he's the right guy for the mission. He doesn't know if he can be successful, not just with training this next set of aviators, but if he can bring them home, right? It's one thing to train; it's another thing to make sure that they come home, and they come home, right? And so, I think when he comes in to talk to Ice right here, he is here and he's talking about his identity. And what's funny is that he comes in, he's like, my wingman, right? Again, the identity. And then he's like, how are you doing? I don't want to talk about work. Let's talk about you. And Ice is keen enough that he's like, no, we actually do need to talk work right now. And I think Maverick, up until this point in his life, has been very focused on the him things, the things that he does, things that are driving his ego. Whereas Iceman has been thinking much larger, right? At this point, Iceman is the commander in chief of the Pacific Fleet, which his boss is the Secretary of the Navy. So from an administrative standpoint, he doesn't have anybody else in the Navy that he really answers to. I mean, operationally, I think there's one other person that he answers to, but administratively, he answers to the Secretary of the Navy. So Val Kilmer, playing Iceman, has moved up through the ranks, and instead of having this perspective of, about this mission, he has this perspective of, here's this much larger body, here's this group of people that we need to organize to fight wars and win to protect American interests and citizens, domestically and abroad, right? So he has this big picture mindset, and Maverick comes walking in lamenting about whatever his most recent thing is. In this case, it's like, yeah, I'm trying to teach them. They're not learning. They're not ready. And Iceman, he's thinking like this, right? He's got this huge picture, but his time's limited, and so the things that he wants to talk about are very focused. And he knows that Maverick has an identity as a naval aviator, and so when he sits down to interact with him, he doesn't sit down to talk about Penny Benjamin or any of that kind of stuff. He says, hey, let's talk about work. Let's talk about you, right? Because that's how Maverick sees himself. And so this whole interaction is them peeling back all of the obstacles that Maverick has been seeing and really getting to the root of what's on his heart.
for us, like you said, as men, we deal with this stuff. In this picture, I mean, Val Kilmer is very much in the God role of he sees the big picture. Love the way you said that. He knows the things that are going on, and he understands, and he's going to say exactly the right thing for us to process if we actually take the time to sit and ponder it. Because frequently we're like, oh yeah, no, I want to see how you're doing, and let me talk, like you said, let me talk about my girl problem, let me talk about Penny, or let me talk about this. And there's two things that really stood out. One is this idea of time, and I think as we frequently feel behind in this movie, it's so much about time. Your time's running out. Remember the drone rangers, your time's coming to an end, Mav. The pilot is no longer needed. And then there's the critical aspect of the time it takes to get to the reactor to blow it up. It's all about time. There's not enough time. Now you've got a time to teach them. But what does Iceman say? There's still time. Which, like, and he's even taking some of his limited time, he's on his way out as the story goes. And in some of those precious few minutes of his last days on Earth, he's spending with his friend Pete Mitchell. And I think he is Pete Mitchell in this story and not Maverick. And we talked a lot, Britt and I talked in the podcast of the original Top Gun movie a lot about that split, that double identity of the orphan Pete Mitchell and the true son Maverick. We talk about Pete Mitchell is the insecure kid with father issues, but he's Maverick. That is his true identity. The false identity is Pete Mitchell. And what does he do? He's telling all these lies. He believes Rooster doesn't need him. The Navy doesn't need him. They don't want what I have to offer. And how often do I go to God with that? Especially in these times of transition. Because when you talk about it's time to let go, it's what every father faces as their children transition, especially as they transition into adulthood, that idea of who am I becoming? Because it's like I told when my son went to college, I said, I've spent my whole life focused around taking you to school, picking you up, feeding you dinners on these set days. Now you're in college. I don't know what it's like to be your dad anymore. I don't know what it's like to not have control anymore. And we have that same fear. I'm going to lose him. If I let him go and live life, he might do something stupid like wreck his car. But if I hold on and constrict him, he might never forgive me for that. And we think, we think that we diminish ourselves in our role when we say they don't want what I have to offer. This is who I am. But instead of inviting them into who I am, I try to tell them who I am instead of showing them, which is how he transitions out of this. And what God comes back and tells Iceman is the Navy needs you. The kid needs you. That's why you're still here.
What's interesting about that is the choice of words that they use is not the Navy still needs you or the Navy still needs Pete Mitchell.
Right.
He actually says the Navy needs Maverick. Right? The kid
not
needs
this
Maverick.
whiny, insecure Pete Mitchell.
That's why I fought for you. That's why you're still here.
Right? The world doesn't need, frustrated, defensive Paul McDonald. They need Maverick. They don't need that false self that we like to portray, or the one that we hide behind because we're scared. Because, as we talked about in the podcast, that idea of, I don't like that look, Mav. That look of entering into territory where we no longer have control.
Yeah, I think it's super scary as a man to realize that you no longer may have the tools or authority uh, to completely control an outcome, right? I mean, you go back to the Garden of Eden, and we got a couple of trees in the garden. God says, "Hey, don't touch these trees." And I'm sure to some extent, Adam probably sat down and said, "Hey, let's just not touch the trees." And what ends up happening is someone touches the trees and eats the fruit. And, you know, there's a need for control to make everything turn out in your desired outcome. And he comes up with these two things, right? Like, hey, if I let him go, he may never come back. And,
Right.
if I don't let him go, he he might never forgive me. And the two options that he's living in, um, neither of them is a situation where he does go on the mission and he is successful and he does come home and they do have a relationship. In the same way that, Peter saw Jesus walking on the water and he's like, oh, go for a little stroll, during a storm. And he starts looking at all the waves
Yeah.
around him and God's like, no, 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 look up here. Look right here, right? Look, keep your eyes here. You know, Jesus is instructing him to not look at those other things. And what's Maverick doing right here is he's looking at waves. He's staring at swells. He's looking at white caps. And he's the only thing that he sees is
Yeah.
two options, and both of them are bad. And, you know, the question is a question of the heart. I mean, Peter magically, Peter in the Bible, not Pete Mitchell, is Peter, uh, is Peter suddenly have this like cool ability to walk on water? Or is it the fact that he was willing to trust and the faith is what allowed him to walk on water? He doesn't have any special feet or nothing, right? And so, in the same sense, Pete Maverick is sitting there. He's like, hey, I got these two outcomes, uh, but in reality,
Yeah.
all that he has to do is let go. And when he lets go and he releases control and then has faith, something different happens, right? And we know how the movie ends, right? He does come home, um, and they make it through there. And there's some really cool
Great
action
cinematography.
sequences and
Yeah.
some fun special effects and really well written and very very fun. But when you finally let go of your concerns and your focus on your problems and you actually allow things to work, other options prevent themselves and other eventualities come true.
And that's what I had written down, that idea of what is he letting go of? It's time to let go, which just so beautifully and well done from a cinematography standpoint to convey this powerful conversation that's really just words on a screen. But you've got on one sense his identity. I'm not a teacher, I'm a pilot. That idea of Rooster, if he goes, he might die. If he doesn't go, he's never going to forgive me. But what is he really letting go of is his fear. It's time to let go of your fear of who you are, who you're not, who people want, who they don't want. The world needs Maverick, is what Iceman actually says. And that's what God says to us is, yes, you think you're this, you're worried about this. Like he said, don't you think that I know that? That's what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount. Don't you think your Father knows what you need, what worries you, what keeps you up at night? It's like, but the world needs you. And be the person, be the you that I've created you to be. Be Maverick. The world needs Maverick because he does see the bigger picture. We see this very focused little picture of the life that we're living. And we have no idea the impact that we might have when we are able to let it go and become the men that God created us to be. As George McDonald says, in order to be the sons of God, we have to become the sons of God. And that's a process. And it's a process of letting go who we think we are and grasping hold of who we actually are, letting go of the fear and walking in the faith that God knows what he's doing and that God loves us, which is can be really hard, which I think is why this moment was such a turning point, was such a catalyst for the rest of the movie, for what happened, for the story of everything else.
In terms of turning points in movies, in the first movie, the first Top Gun, um, they're out and they're on a training mission, and Maverick goes through some jet wash, and he goes into the flat spin, and the flat spin starts spinning. One engine goes out, which causes the plane to turn. It starts spinning as it comes down, and the reason why that's a bad day is because the canopy. Normally, when you're flying on a plane and you need to eject, you hit the canopy, and the canopy comes up, and the wind resistance pushes it off. Well, in this case, it didn't do that because it was in a flat spin. So they go to hit the ejector button. Maverick makes it out, but Goose hits the canopy on the way out, and it kills him. He falls down into the ocean, and you see this moment in the first movie of Maverick swimming to Goose, and they have this, the green stuff in the water, and he's like, "Goose, no!" And the scene plays out of him holding his best friend, who may or may not be dead at that point, and the swimmer, the rescue swimmer from the Coast Guard, shows up, and he's like, "I got to get this guy up on the helicopter, right? Like, hey, I gotta go do what I'm here to do. I need you to let go so that way I can try to save him. We don't know if he's alive or dead at that point, right?" And so he's like, "You gotta let go. You gotta let go. You gotta let go." And so in the first movie, this is kind of a transitionary point. So they pull Goose out. He goes up in the helicopter. He finishes his Top Gun training, and then he has a conversation with Viper later on. And Viper's talking about his dad and kind of what his dad experienced. And then, Viper, and Viper is the instructor in the first movie. That's kind of like the super um, experienced, super lethal, like Top Gun. Like he's one of the best pilots in the world at that point. He says, "Hey, you have a choice here, right? You can either look at what's happened, and you can choose to graduate with your class, or you can choose to walk away. And honestly, no one would fault you for walking away. No one would fault you for responding that way to this situation because of just how big it feels, right? Like you feel responsibility, but when it comes down to it, like you got to let him go." And Viper says that to him a few times. And so in the first movie, you have the swimmer telling Maverick, "Hey, you physically have to release your arms so that way I can take him." And then you have Viper saying, "Hey, you have to emotionally let go so that way you can move on." And then what happens is Maverick goes off on this last mission, and this is in the first movie again. Still talking about the first movie, and uh, and he goes on this final mission, and the there's two pilots that get launched. Iceman and is one of them. The other one, I forget who it was. That plane gets shot down. Maverick gets launched. He's the backup. He's supersonic, trying to catch up to him. He sees this situation. He's like, "I'm not ready for this. I'm not ready to commit." Right? And the music that's played in this scene is the same music that's being played as Maverick is in the cockpit next to the battle with a friend in danger, and he's trying to figure out what he should do. Should I engage? Should I fight? Should I do this? Right? And you look at the movie, and he's sitting there and he's touching Goose's dog tags apparently with his other hand, and he's like, "Talk to me, Goose. Talk to me, Goose." And you have the exact same music playing in that scene as what you have in this scene. And it's this moment where Maverick has a choice. He's at a crossroads, and he needs to figure out, is he going to engage? Is he going to let go? What is he actually going to do here? And in the first movie, Shawshank Redemption,
Yep.
Tim Robbins uh, is the actor that plays Merlin, who's sitting behind him in the first movie. And Tim Robbins like, what are you doing? ICE is under attack. You got to get him. You got to re-engage Maverick. What are you doing? He's going to be out there alone. And he's hassling Maverick, who's like having this existential crisis. And Maverick finally chooses to engage. And all the music resolves, and Maverick turns back in, and he restarts the fight. And it's paralyzing what the world does to us. The things that we go through and the things that we experience, they make us not want to interact. They make us not want to engage. They make us want to have all the control to make sure that nothing ever like this ever happens again. Like, hey, I need to make sure nothing bad happens, and it's either I'm going to make sure that nothing bad happens, or I'm just not going to fight, right? And Maverick takes the opposite approach, right? Instead of all right, I'm going to re-engage, I'm going to restart this fight, which was what he had to deal with in the first movie. This time it wasn't I have to re-engage in the fight. I have to let go and let Rooster fight his own battles. And I have to have faith that this entire thing is going to turn out according to a much larger story that's taking place, that I may or may not see what's happening. And Maverick is fortunate because he's got Ice with him, right? And Ice is in this scenario where he's watching his friend, and he knows Maverick well enough that Maverick walks in and he's like, oh yeah, I have stage 4 cancer. I don't have long to live, but I know that you're affected by something. I know that you are burdened by something. And I know you well enough that I'm going to say the right things I need to in order to get to the bottom of it. I want to talk about work. There's still time. Then teach him. It's time to let go. Right? I mean, that's what, 20 words, 25 words? And he manages to completely pick apart his friend and get down to the root of the issue. And Maverick has to let go. And I think that in both movies, there's a parallel lesson that goes in perhaps different directions about how we engage and how we respond when life gives us options and we use the best of our ability to figure out exactly what our options are. And then we're like, oh, this is the only two way it can happen. And in reality, there's other things that work, and there's other opportunities and possibilities that we choose not to address or focus on because, maybe we have high stakes or great risk. We don't want to focus on a successful outcome. We just want to focus on all the things that are affecting or vexing us, right? I think the movie portrays that really well.
Like, it's all about what you focus on. Like, if you're trying not to lose, you're just going to end up losing, and what you're afraid of is actually going to happen.
That's not a great strategy.
You'll control your kids to the point where they will go away just to get you to let them be kids, to let them learn.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, bad things might happen. And that's where God comes in and says, I love you. If it happens, I'm still here. Just because this happened doesn't mean I don't love you. But we have to let go of that. One of the practices I've been using recently is through the 1 minute pause app from Wild at Heart. And it's just like a 1 minute, 3 minute, 5, 10 minute, you have choices, different meditations you can do, but it's all centered around what John Eldridge calls benevolent detachment, where you say, I give everything and everyone over to you, God, because I can't carry it. I can't carry Rooster. I can't carry Goose. I can't carry the Navy. All I can do is carry who I am. And what we see in the movie, the rest of the movie that we talk about on our podcast, what we see is Maverick's expression of who he is what they need. It is how to teach them. Oh, you need to teach them. All you've done is teach them it can't be done. Show them it can be done. And that's what they need. They need inspiration. They need hope. Show them it can be done. Let go of your fear of what other people think Let go of what Rooster wants, what the Navy wants. It doesn't matter what they want. Go be who you are and show them the way to success. Lead them in the mission. Show them how to sacrifice. And that's, I mean, that's what Jesus did. He showed us how to do it. But this key, and I think that's why this moment is so key, is just there's so much that we live in, whether it's fear or believing the lies of who I am, who the world wants, who our kids want, who our wife wants, when we're just called to be us. Don't be Pete Mitchell. What the line from what was that? The line from Say Anything. Don't be a guy. There's thousands of guys. Be a man. Don't be Pete Mitchell. Be Maverick. They need Maverick. And that's your true self. That's the person God created. That's the person God had in mind before the creation of the world, that your kids need, your wife needs, that the people around you need today at this moment in time.
I think it's really challenging to do that. When Ice types out on the computer and he says, it's time to let go. In the movie, there's like 25 seconds of silence from the time that Maverick reads that until he finally responds. You see Iceman write it, and after he writes it, you see Pete's reaction to it, and then they show you what Iceman wrote, and then you watch Pete continue to react to it. And so this simple, elegant truth of it's time to let go, the way that Maverick responds to that is by saying, I don't know how. I don't know how to let go.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's something that is easy to deal with. I think that you always want to have a say. You always want to have some level of control. You always want to have some level of influence, especially when stakes are high and you want things to work out within this perspective that you have. But if you don't let go, um, people can't live their lives. God can't receive the glory. His will and oversight and success in these things will never be shown, right? The testimony won't be given because the success will never be seen.
Mm.
And so the way that Maverick responds, I don't know how, I relate to that a lot. I mean, I had a situation, an interaction with a guy once, and we were talking about, he was telling me how he has got a couple of friends, and they're really, really good friends. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. So, I mean, let's say that I want to have friendships like what you have. Um, like, how do I get that? How do I do that? Right? What does that look like? And he's like, cool. Yeah. I mean, if you want to have friends, then you need to just go have friends.
Super helpful.
Okay.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. So I don't understand. It's like, well, yeah. I mean, you know what a friend is, right? Yeah. Okay. Then go be a friend, and eventually you'll find a friend. Okay. I mean, I get it. Like, it's time to let go. Cool. Yeah, that's cool. I get it. It's really simple and it's very elegant. It's very moving, but I don't actually understand how to freaking let go. And when we see the disciples wrestling that with Jesus, right? They're trying to control the situation. Peter's over here cutting off ears, right? In Gethsemane, and there's bloody tears happening, and people are being crucified. How do you let go, right? What was it like as a disciple to watch, the person that you followed for years die on a cross, and then you have to wait 40 days, and somehow you have to still be faithful and go through this thing and believe in God when you physically watched your Savior be crucified and die? It's hard to have faith. It's hard to let go. It's hard to live in a bigger story. It's hard to trust Jesus to do things that you can't see and that you can't fathom when you know that the odds are stacked against you, right? Maverick's over here The Navy doesn't need me. The kid doesn't need me. And Val Kilmer, Iceman, who's one of the highest ranks in the Department of the Navy, and he rolls up to the Secretary of Defense, is like, nah, the Navy needs you. The kid needs you. You're wrong.
That's
What you're hearing is what the enemy wants to hear you, is what the enemy wants you to listen to, but that's not the story that I have planned. There's something different.
So if you guys enjoyed this extended discussion of this one scene, and really, I don't think we talked about anything that we really talked about on the podcast. And, you know, the podcast is a 2-parter, and we talked for a couple hours and plus hours before and lunch and all this other thing. So check out the podcast, Men at the Movies podcast. All the links are down there. Check out that 1 Minute Pause app. I'll put a link for that down below as well. And yeah, do all the things, like our links, but really, like you said, learn to let it go. And the way to do it is by letting go and being sort of accepting the truth of who you are, which is simple, but not easy. Jesus said a lot of things that are simple. Nothing about it is easy. So Andreas, thank you. Andreas loves Top Gun stuff, but we talk about all that on the podcast. So I don't want to step on that. So go check out the podcast and check us out next week here on Men at the Movies, the YouTube channel.